Okay, good day, people. So someone had forwarded to me a very interesting dialogue between John Dupree and Alex Rosenberg on non-reductive physicalism. And basically, if you're familiar with either of these folks, I mean, they're both trying to defend a physicalist, naturalist position, whereas Dupree is giving a defense for some forms of non-reductivism, that you're not going to be able to subsume all of biology into the field of physics, whereas Rosenberg gives, if you've seen him in the movie Naturalism Forward, he gives what some of the other philosophers there are calling this mad dog reductionism. I mean, he basically is saying that there's nothing but bosons and fermions, and that when that science, when physics is in its mature state, and we may not see that in our lifetimes, I mean, he's sort of granting that, but he's suggesting that when physics is at its mature state, people will realize that everything is reducible down to what's occurring somehow at that level. Okay, I would stand with myself as a sort of physicalist and a naturalist. Okay, I think you can maintain that position. That is, you disavow the supernatural, you disavow anything that we're going to call, I guess, divine intervention, something that would be outside of the confines of some methodology of understanding it, or of some means of, again, of expressing it and comprehending it. I think what Rosenberg, from my perspective, he's sort of doing, he's falling into, like, at a massive scale, the two most, I guess, pernicious forms of philosophical error. And I'm sure he would probably object, but I mean, in some way, it's a combination of reductio ad absurdum with post hoc ergo propter hoc. And by that latter, I mean, because all causes have some previous cause, then there can be nothing like a new cause, nothing like someone intending to do something, or some change being introduced at the level of a person, perhaps sitting down, looking at a calendar, and making a commitment with another person. That's sort of off the field, because this is all epiphenomenal for Rosenberg, right? Okay, so rather than get into some of it without sounding just, I guess, ridiculous, I'm going to see if I can't give really solid examples. Now, Dupree tries to give the example of an elephant, and he says, are you suggesting that all the knowledge, all the possible knowledge about an elephant could be had by the level of physics explanation? That is, could we take that, all of the knowledge that we're able to have about the world that would be derived from the laws and formulas of physics, would that give us everything that you would need to know in order to know everything that there is to know about elephants? That is sort of the way that he was coming at it. And it was an interesting case. I do think, unfortunately, that it was a slippery slope into, well, how many of those things just had survival value, and survival value in terms of, everything from the way that proteins are catalyzed to, I mean, certain evolutionary developmental, I guess, processes that are regulated through physical dynamics like gravity and, resistances and other things. So there is a sense in which those examples maybe didn't carry the day in a way that I think Dupree wanted them to. I think, there would be a good way to come at it about, do people hunt elephants? Are they endangered species? What is an endangered species? They didn't go that far, but I thought I would try to give up some other examples here. And if anyone wants to see what I'm going to take to be the position for anti-reductionism, now, not to say that reductionist forms aren't appropriate and useful in some contexts, in some places. Okay, yes. That doesn't mean that this kind of mad dog reductionism, which it kind of seems like a person compensating for information overload by hoping that there's going to be a simple key for everything that ails you. I mean, some of it is, I distrust the easiness of it. Okay, now in some way you say, well, what could be further from, knowledge on the horizon, right? It seems like it couldn't be possible. In other sense, I'm not denying it for supernatural reasons or anything like that. I'm just suggesting that there are emergent properties that come in through forms of biology. Now, maybe, just for argument's sake, maybe I would grant that chemistry is reducible to physics. Okay? I'm going to maybe grant that. Biology, not so much. There's going to be forms of luck and happenstance and chance occurrences that are folded in stochastic processes due to predators fleeing, availability of resources. There get to be so many complex dynamics that play out in probability fields where you have living organisms. But, okay, rather than go to those which I think are going to get too easily caught in something like evolutionary survival value, yada, 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 I'm going to try to go to some of these. Like, would the argument then be that Rosenberg going to suggest that some child who is born who has a very rare disease, the rare disease isn't to be explained at the biological level, but it's to be explained at the level of fermions and bosons? So if some person has this disease and then we realize what it was, but it could have been inoculated against, do you inoculate it at the level of the fermions and bosons? No, you inoculate it at the biological level. See, something that I want to go, it doesn't even make any sense. Try to think about, and this is, comes from the area of linguistics. I would encourage everyone to try to think about this example. And for me, this is the linchpin example to someone who, if they're really entrenched in a robust reductionism, one of the sort of, again, linchpin examples that help force the issue that reality isn't best understood by reducing it all to one level. And the example comes from Anthony Wilden, and it goes, take this one. This sentence is in English. I guess I'm saying it could be a statement. I said, this statement is in English. Now, there must be more than one language. There must be more than one level to language for that statement to be heard and then assessed as true. Like I said, if I say this statement is in English, there must be both the content conveyed by the statement and then the statement occurring in a code, in a language that's more than and not reducible to the content that's conveyed. Because that statement can be translated into any other language, and yet if it's translated into any other language, the statement becomes false. The same propositional content is conveyed, but now it becomes false content. When I say, I think people would need to be able to address that. This is also true for lots of forms of poetry where the poetry could rhyme in one's native tongue, but when you translate the poem, it loses its rhyme. Now, it's not losing the rhyme at the level of bosons and fermions. Are the differences between the content level of a message and the acoustical medium that it's used to, and I don't mean the sound medium, but I mean the particular language that is going to be used to convey some propositional content. See, I think the discrepancies between languages and the content conveyed, it doesn't seem like that really relies upon the physics of the issue. Now, it's always going to be in some way dependent on the physics in the sense that it can't occur without the laws of physics, but that doesn't mean it's reducible to them. That's kind of silly, right? Try to think, if you want a very robust example, right? Take antiques or artifacts, and in particular ancient coins. So if I have some Roman denarii, right? And what is the value of this Roman coin? Well, now look, the coin can't be produced by anything that violated a physical laws. So in some way, you could be a hardline materialist and say anything that exists at all could not have violated a physical law in its existence. Okay, so very good. So there's never been a violation of a physical law. So that everything exists is somehow in compliance with physical laws and the possibilities that physical laws have, I guess, prescribed and enabled and circumscribed and all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't mean that they're just reducible to those, because take the value of that coin. The value of the coin isn't determined by the physical causes of production. There are a whole set of socio-historical causes related to the community in which it's occurring, the historical period, and the kinds of valuations of worth that a particular recipient is willing to give for that coin. I mean, not only is haggling and bartering part of the dynamic of coins in the ancient world, of how much is this denarii going to be worth for this particular person, but for a long time you could say that money of antiquated peoples is worthless, but then it can come back to value in a museum, and the critical shifts in value that occur for something like a denarii, those aren't critical shifts that are somehow occurring at the level of physics. To try to say, oh, well, the more that we learn about bosons and fermions, we're going to discover how the value of ancient coins somehow gets mediated from their loss in the culture and their sort of resurgence into a museum or something like this. And notice here, right, what an antique is. An antique isn't, or an ancient artifact, when we call something an antique, we're not just talking about how old something is. I mean, that's part of it, but it partly means the world into which that item fits is no longer there. So if I hand out a buggy whip to someone, the meaning of the buggy whip, it's not in the buggy whip. It's not set up by a series of properties that make the buggy whip the buggy whip. Now you might say, well, yeah, the buggy whip only has a relationship to all those other things. But if all those other things are gone, what is that thing? Now if you say, well, it's, I mean, I don't even know how someone would try to deal with things like antiques, the way people value things, and the variations of value that come from things like that. Try to think of dietary practices. I'll give those as the last example. Dietary practices vary around the globe, right? What people eat, what they think of as food, what they don't think of as food. That seems to me to be a lot more of historical circumstance. Or take musical instruments, There are physical laws that set the constraints on who could build a musical instrument in whatever way they can build one. Now, all of the musical instruments that have been built, none of them have violated physical laws, but that doesn't mean that there was a necessary reason for Chinese music to emerge in China the way that it did. It was a stochastic process that happened from a fortuitous coming together of certain kinds of materials in certain kind of rhythms in certain places. And then the question of diffusion of certain forms of music and musical instruments, they're socio-historical problems.